The sky had always been full of questions. For decades, humans had looked up at the stars, wondering if they were alone, if anyone else was out there. Scientists built huge arrays of telescopes, listening for signals, scanning the cosmos for anything unusual. For most people, it was just background curiosity, something fascinating to think about while life on Earth carried on. But in a small, isolated observatory far from the nearest city, a team of astronomers noticed something that would change everything. At first, it seemed like a mistake. A tiny repeating signal flickered across the screens. It was faint, almost like static, but it had a rhythm. The computers initially classified it as a pulsar, a kind of dying star sending out regular bursts. That explanation should have been enough. But one of the scientists, a quiet, careful person who preferred numbers to people, noticed something strange. The signal wasn't just repeating, it followed patterns. Math patterns. Simple ones at first, but then more complex. Almost like someone was trying to communicate using mathematics as a language. The team ran every test they could think of. They recalibrated their instruments. They triple-checked the coordinates. Nothing explained it. The signal was real, and it was deliberate. When the data was finally analyzed by a specially trained artificial intelligence, something remarkable happened. The AI confirmed what the humans had been starting to suspect. This wasn't random noise from the universe. Someone or something was trying to send a message. The content of that message shocked everyone. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't, "Hello, we come in peace." It was a plea. Simple, direct, clear, help. Biological extinction imminent. The coordinates were precise, pointing to a system of planets orbiting a red star, nearly 92 light-years away. That distance, in human terms, meant that even a message traveling at the speed of light would take over 90 years to arrive. And yet here it was, reaching Earth with a sense of urgency that made the team's hearts race. The room went silent. Everyone knew what this could mean. A civilization somewhere out there, facing total destruction, had chosen Earth as the only place they could reach. And they had reached us. It wasn't easy to get people to take it seriously. Governments debated, scientists argued, and the media speculated wildly. Some people called it a hoax. Others warned that responding could be dangerous. And some quietly wondered if humanity even had the right to interfere. But a small coalition of countries decided that the risk was worth it. They created a secret project called Dawn Corps, a mission designed to go where no human had gone before, not to conquer, not to colonize, but to rescue. The team selected for the mission was unusual. They weren't the typical astronauts. They were people who had lived in extreme conditions, trained to survive what would kill most humans. Some had grown up in harsh environments where survival depended on strength, skill, and adaptability. Others were engineers and medics who had spent years learning how to fix broken systems under impossible circumstances. Every member of the team was called a Deathworlder in Whispers back on Earth, a term that meant they could endure what most beings could not. Training began immediately. The volunteers spent years in simulations, preparing for every possible scenario. They learned to navigate planets with toxic atmospheres, to move through radiation storms, to handle extreme gravity. They trained their minds to cope with isolation, because no human had ever traveled this far before. And they trained to make choices that could mean life or death for themselves and others. Even with all the preparation, there were moments of doubt. One night, as the team watched the stars from their training facility, someone asked the question that lingered in everyone's mind. What if they aren't what we expect? Another person answered quietly, almost to themselves, "Then we'll still try. That's all we can do." Finally, the day came when the first human ship left Earth, traveling toward the distant system. The vessel, named Artemis IV, carried the best of what humanity could offer. Every seat was filled with someone who had chosen to face the unknown, someone willing to leave everything familiar behind. Families and friends said goodbye, though most could not fully understand what it meant to risk everything for a message from another world. The journey was long and lonely. The crew experienced time differently, moving at speeds that made months pass in weeks, weeks pass in days. They grew closer in their isolation, sharing stories from Earth, small comforts, laughter, and fears. But beneath the surface, there was a constant awareness. They were carrying the hope of a civilization they had never met, and the weight of that hope could crush them if they faltered. Meanwhile, on Earth, people waited and watched. The signal that had started it all was only a faint memory now, but it had sparked something bigger. Conversations about humanity's place in the universe changed overnight. Questions about morality, survival, and responsibility dominated debates. Could humans really be saviors? Could they even survive the journey themselves? As the Artemis IV approached the coordinates, the crew began to see hints of the system's destruction. From orbit, the planets were dark and cracked. Some had lost their oceans entirely. Others were covered in clouds of ash and dust. The sun was dim, red, and dying. No life was immediately visible, only ruins. And then, for the first time, they received a response from the aliens themselves. Not through computers, not through code, but through living signals, patterns in the atmosphere, subtle shifts in electromagnetic fields, something that only the Deathworlders could detect. They realized then that the message they had received years ago was not just a call for help. It was a guide, showing them how to find the survivors. The crew's hearts pounded. After years of training and months of travel, the unknown had become tangible. They were not just explorers anymore. They were the first humans to set foot in a place that had almost ceased to exist. And somewhere in that desolate system, beings waited, fragile and desperate, hoping against hope that the humans who answered would not fail them. For the first time, the Deathworlders understood the true meaning of their name. They were built to endure where others could not. They were the species that had survived countless natural disasters, wars, and diseases on Earth. And now, that resilience was needed for something far larger than themselves, a chance to save life on a scale they had never imagined. No one knew what would happen when they landed. No one could predict the challenges ahead, but for the first time in human history, a bridge was being built across the stars. The bridge was fragile, made of courage, skill, and hope, and the first step had already been taken. In that moment, as the Artemis IV approached the red star system, the crew looked at each other. There were no words, only understanding. The universe had sent a call for help, and humans had answered. For better or worse, they were now part of something far bigger than Earth, far bigger than themselves. They were Deathworlders stepping into the unknown, ready to face whatever waited on the other side of the stars. And somewhere in the darkness of that shattered system, eyes, or whatever the aliens had, watched, waiting, hoping, and for the first time in decades they were not alone. The ship moved silently through the blackness of space, carrying the humans closer to a system they barely understood. Each member of the crew stared at the screens, studying the images of fractured planets and ash-choked skies. No one spoke at first. It was too much to take in. The scale of destruction was beyond imagination, even for those trained for extremes. They had seen harsh environments before. Simulated storms, toxic atmospheres, radiation storms, but nothing like this. The system looked like it had been ripped apart from the inside. Oceans boiled, mountains had collapsed, entire ecosystems had vanished. And yet, scattered among the devastation, faint signs of life flickered. Small energy patterns, unusual movements, hints that something was still surviving. As the ship drew closer, a team meeting was held. Everyone understood the importance of what lay ahead. They were not explorers here. They were rescuers. They had trained for decades, and yet, the unknown was always the hardest part. "We don't know what we'll find," one of the crew said quietly. "It could be nothing. Or it could be worse than we can imagine," another nodded. "We're ready for the worst. That's why we're here." The crew had been called Deathworlders for a reason. Humans had adapted to survive environments that would kill most life forms instantly. On Earth, they had endured radiation zones, deadly storms, and extreme conditions. Their bodies were strong, their minds resilient, and their instincts sharp. But this system, this broken world, tested every limit. The first landing site was chosen based on the patterns they had detected in the alien signals. It was a planet that still held thin traces of water in deep basins. The atmosphere was barely breathable, laced with chemicals and toxins that would kill an unprepared human in minutes. But the Deathworlders had suits, filters, and years of training. They were ready. The descent was tense. The ship's engines roared as it pierced the thick orange clouds that covered the planet's surface. Visibility was almost zero, and every shadow could hide danger. When the landing gear finally touched the ground, the crew held their breath. Dust and ash rose around them, clinging to their suits. The world smelled of sulfur and burnt rock, a harsh reminder that life here had been pushed to its limits. As they stepped outside, Their boots sank into the gray, cracked soil. Every sound was amplified: the hiss of the atmosphere, the creak of the ship, the distant rumble of shifting land. For a moment it felt like the planet was alive, watching them, waiting. Then the first signs of the aliens appeared. They were nothing like humans, but the movement was unmistakably deliberate. Small, fragile creatures emerged from cracks in the ground, their bodies thin and pale, their limbs delicate but agile. They froze when they saw the humans, unsure whether to flee or approach. One member of the crew stepped forward slowly, hands raised to show no threat. The aliens responded cautiously, inching closer, their eyes, or whatever served as eyes, shimmering with curiosity and fear. It was a moment of quiet understanding. Communication had to start somewhere, and trust was the first step. Over the next several days, the humans worked to establish contact and assess the situation. The aliens, who called themselves the Larathi, had once been a thriving civilization, with cities, technology, and culture that spanned the planet. Now what remained were small clusters, clinging to survival in shelters made from twisted metal and stone. The humans learned quickly. They discovered the Larathi were highly intelligent, capable of complex thought, but their species had been decimated by a plague that spread during a violent civil war. Entire cities had been lost, ecosystems destroyed, and survivors had retreated into isolated enclaves. The Deathworlders began helping. They repaired life support systems, purified water, and stabilized shelters. Every small task made a difference, and the aliens watched in awe as humans, who were supposed to be outsiders, worked tirelessly to save them. It wasn't easy. The planet fought back at every turn. Ash storms could blind and choke. The soil was unstable, and toxic gases rose unexpectedly. But the crew adapted quickly. They moved like shadows, always alert, always aware. Their training and experience turned them into living tools of survival. And the Larathi began to realize that these humans were unlike anything they had known before. There were moments of tension. The Larathi did not trust easily. They had lost almost everything, and had learned that outsiders often brought danger rather than help. Misunderstandings happened. One day a small group of humans tried to enter a shelter, and the Larathi reacted defensively, sending warning signals. The humans had to step back, showing patience and respect. Over time, the aliens began to follow the humans' lead, learning to accept help without fear. The crew also discovered something unexpected. The Larathi were not passive victims. They had survived in the harshest conditions, hiding in caves, filtering water through rudimentary systems, and scavenging energy from what little remained of their technology. They had resilience, cunning, and intelligence that reminded the humans of themselves. And slowly, a bond began to form, not just of necessity but of shared understanding. One of the most dangerous tasks was restoring a central energy hub that had powered a network of shelters. It had been damaged by the plague and years of neglect. The humans worked together, each member performing tasks that would challenge even the best engineers. Sparks flew, systems overloaded, and at one point an entire section nearly collapsed. But the humans pushed forward. They used their knowledge, strength, and patience to bring the system back online. When it hummed with life, the aliens responded with a quiet cheer, a sound that carried hope in a place that had known little of it for decades. The humans also began learning from the Larathi. Their survival strategies, their knowledge of the planet, and their understanding of local dangers proved invaluable. The crew adapted alien techniques, blending them with their own skills to create solutions no one on Earth could have imagined. It was a partnership born out of necessity, but it became something deeper, a connection between two species that had both been forced to endure extreme challenges. Days turned into weeks. The humans and Larathi began to rely on each other. Food distribution was organized, shelters improved, and basic medical care provided. The Deathworlders saw their role clearly. They were not conquerors, not invaders. They were the lifeline for a species that had been abandoned by its own circumstances. And the Larathi, once wary and withdrawn, began to trust them. During one quiet evening, as the red sun dipped below jagged mountains, one of the humans reflected on what had brought them here. This mission had started as a response to a signal, a mathematical plea for help from light years away. But it had grown into something far more profound. Humanity had stepped into the unknown, and in doing so, had become a part of a story that was larger than any single life. The Larathi had begun to refer to the humans as Deathworlders, not as a warning, but as a sign of respect. They recognized that these humans had survived conditions that would have destroyed anyone else. They understood that the crew's strength was not just physical but mental and moral, and slowly, hope returned to a planet that had known almost none. The bond between the humans and the Larathi was fragile, easily broken by fear or misstep, but it was growing. And as the humans prepared for the next phase of their mission, rebuilding critical infrastructure, expanding safe zones, and ensuring the survival of more Larathi clusters, they understood a simple truth. Survival depended on cooperation, courage, and compassion. And in that harsh, ash-covered world, a new kind of partnership was being born, one that would test limits, challenge fears, and ultimately redefine what it meant to be human. The mission was far from over. The worst might still come. But for now, in the quiet moments between storms, the humans and the Larathi worked together, learning from each other, surviving together, and quietly shaping a future that once seemed impossible. The crew of the Artemisfer had spent weeks adjusting to the Larathi's fragile world. Every day brought new challenges. The ash-choked air burned their lungs even through protective filters. The ground shifted beneath their feet. Storms of sand and chemical residue could strike without warning. Yet, despite the constant danger, a sense of purpose kept them moving forward. They were no longer just visitors. They had become part of this broken world, essential to the survival of a species that had been pushed to the brink. Every repair, every life saved, every small victory gave the aliens reason to hope again. And the humans felt it too. There was a satisfaction that came from being needed, from being able to make a real difference in a world that had almost given up. One morning, the team received a signal from a distant cluster of survivors. It was faint but recognizable, a series of energy pulses that indicated the presence of life. The humans knew this could be risky. The terrain between them and the cluster was treacherous, filled with deep crevices and pockets of toxic gases. But leaving those Larathi behind was not an option. They prepared carefully, double-checking their equipment and reviewing the alien survival maps they had been learning to interpret. The journey across the landscape was grueling. Thick clouds of ash made every step uncertain, and the air filters were pushed to their limits. The ground shifted underfoot, and once a small fissure nearly swallowed a human team member. But they pressed on, communicating silently, relying on hand signals and quick gestures. They had learned that noise could attract dangers, natural and otherwise, so quiet efficiency became their greatest asset. When they finally reached the cluster, the humans were stunned. The survivors had built makeshift shelters using remnants of their technology and natural resources. Despite the devastation, they had adapted in ingenious ways, creating water filtration systems from scraps of metal and wind energy, and capturing what little sunlight penetrated the dense clouds to generate heat. Their resilience was extraordinary, and the humans could not help but feel respect and awe. Yet there was no time for admiration. The cluster had been weakened by scarcity and disease. Many of the Larathi were malnourished, their bodies fragile from long exposure to the harsh environment. The humans immediately set to work, distributing purified water and energy supplies, assisting with shelter repairs, and administering basic medical care. Communication remained difficult. The Larathi language was subtle, relying on shifts in light, color, and vibration that the humans could only partially understand. Yet over time, patterns emerged. Gestures, repeated signals, and patient observation allowed the humans to convey simple concepts: safety, food distribution, and directions for shelter repairs. Through this slow process, the crew began to understand something profound. These aliens were not simply survivors. They were intelligent, innovative, and aware of the larger picture. They had maintained records of their technology and culture, even in their reduced circumstances, and the humans could see fragments of a once great civilization in the patterns of their shelters, their tools, and the way they organized themselves. For the first time, one of the humans spoke aloud to the group, breaking the quiet tension. "They're learning from us and we're learning from them," they said. "It's not just survival, it's understanding each other." The team nodded. It was true. Every interaction, every shared effort to repair systems or purify water, created a bond. The Larathi began to trust the humans, slowly but surely. Their fear of outsiders diminished as they saw patience, courage, and care in action, and the humans in turn were struck by the aliens' determination to endure despite overwhelming odds. In the following days, the humans focused on restoring a central communication hub that could allow all the Larathi clusters to connect. It was a massive undertaking. The hub had been damaged during the Civil War, and years of neglect had left it unstable and dangerous. The humans worked carefully, using scaffolding, improvised tools, and protective suits to prevent exposure to toxic fumes. At one point, part of the hub collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. One of the crew members lunged to stabilize a section of machinery, narrowly avoiding injury. When the dust cleared, the Larathi emitted a series of vibrations that the humans interpreted as gratitude and relief. It was the first time the aliens had expressed emotion in a way the humans could understand directly. As the hub came online, the Larathi clusters began to communicate with one another for the first time in decades. Messages passed through energy pulses, simple signals that connected distant shelters and allowed the aliens to coordinate resources. The humans watched in quiet satisfaction as the survivors began to organize themselves, reclaiming some control over their lives after years of chaos. The humans also noticed subtle changes in the aliens' behavior. Where once there was hesitation and fear, there was now cautious confidence. The Larathi began to assist in the repairs, following the humans' guidance while contributing their own expertise. It was not perfect, and mistakes were frequent, but the collaboration marked a turning point. For the first time in decades, the Larathi were not merely surviving. They were participating actively in shaping their own recovery. One evening, as the red sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ash clouds in shades of deep orange and gray, the crew gathered around a small shelter. They shared a meal, simple rations but meaningful. There was laughter, quiet conversation, and an unspoken understanding that they were making a difference. The aliens hovering nearby observed in silence, learning from the humans' gestures and interactions. The humans had started to see the world not just as a broken planet, but as a place of potential. Small victories, a repaired water pump, a stabilized shelter, a recovered energy system, showed that even in the harshest conditions, life could endure. And each day the humans grew more confident that their presence was not just necessary, but transformative. There were still dangers. The planet remained volatile. Toxic clouds could sweep across a cluster in moments. Deep fissures threatened any unwary step, and the after effects of the plague lingered. But the humans had learned to anticipate and respond. Their training, combined with what they were learning from the aliens, made them nearly unstoppable in their mission. One morning, while surveying a ridge above the main cluster, a crew member spotted movement in the distance. At first it seemed like a natural phenomenon, a swirl of ash or wind, but then patterns emerged that suggested intelligence. Another group of survivors had been discovered, isolated and unaware of the efforts taking place below. The humans realized that their work was far from complete. The mission would continue, stretching farther across the planet, testing endurance, courage, and ingenuity. And yet, despite the challenges, hope was growing. The humans had proven that even the most fragile life could be supported, that trust could be earned, and that survival could be shared across species. The bond between the Deathworlders and the Larathi was stronger than ever. Each side had lessons to teach, skills to share, and courage to inspire. For the humans, this experience had changed them. They were no longer just explorers. They were builders of life, lifelines for a species that had almost vanished. They had seen resilience in forms that challenged their understanding of survival and compassion. And they had realized that even in the harshest environments, connection could thrive. The humans also began to document their experiences. Every repaired shelter, every interaction with the Larathi, every small innovation was recorded. Not for glory or recognition, but as a guide for future generations, both human and alien. They understood that their journey was not just about saving lives today, but about creating a framework for continued survival and growth. And so, the mission continued. The Deathworlders pressed onward, moving from cluster to cluster, bridging gaps, repairing systems, and building trust. Each step forward was hard-won, each victory small but significant. The Larathi, once broken and fearful, began to emerge from the shadows of their own world, reclaiming not just survival but a sense of agency and dignity. In the evenings, when storms were calm and the ash settled, the humans would look at the red sun and reflect. They were far from Earth, in a place that tested every limit, facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. And yet, they had made a difference. They had answered a call for help that no one else could have, and in doing so, they had forged a connection that would endure. The humans understood something essential. Survival was more than enduring conditions or repairing technology. It was about trust, patience, courage, and empathy. And in a place where life had been nearly extinguished, they were learning that humanity had something unique to offer, a willingness to step into the unknown and stand by those who had no one else to turn to. As part 3 of their journey drew to a close, the humans felt a quiet determination. The mission would grow more dangerous, the planet would test them further, but they were ready. Each obstacle was not just a challenge, but an opportunity to strengthen the bond between human and Larathi, to prove that survival was possible even in the darkest corners of the universe. And in that desolate, ash-choked world, the first seeds of hope had truly begun to take root. The humans had grown accustomed to the harshness of the planet, but even so, each day brought new dangers. The ash storms that swept across the landscape could appear without warning, and hidden fissures threatened to swallow anyone who wasn't careful. Yet the crew of the Artemis IV moved with confidence, their experience and training turning fear into focus. They were no longer visitors, they were lifelines. After weeks of working with one cluster of Larathi survivors, the team received signals indicating trouble elsewhere. Another group had been isolated, cut off from the others for years, and now their shelters were failing. Some had lost access to clean water. Others had no energy to run even the simplest life support systems. The humans knew they had to act quickly. Every moment of delay could mean the difference between survival and extinction for these survivors. Preparing for the journey, the crew checked every piece of equipment. Filters, sensors, communication devices, and protective suits were tested repeatedly. Unlike Earth missions, there was no margin for error. One small mistake could lead to disaster. As the team moved out, they carried not only supplies but a sense of responsibility heavier than any weight they had ever known. The journey to the isolated cluster was more dangerous than any previous route. The landscape was unstable, scarred by tectonic upheaval and years of chemical erosion. The humans navigated through narrow canyons, across cracked plains, and around sinkholes that threatened to collapse under their weight. Every step was measured, every movement cautious, and yet even in this desolation, signs of life appeared, faint energy signals, small vibrations in the ground, subtle hints that the Larathi were still surviving. When the humans finally arrived, they found a community on the verge of collapse. The shelters were crumbling. Water sources had dried or become contaminated. The air was heavy with toxins, and the survivors were weak from hunger and exposure. Many had thought the humans would not come, that they had been abandoned. The crew worked tirelessly. Teams were divided to address the most urgent needs, repairing shelters, purifying water, stabilizing power systems. Some humans climbed precarious scaffolding to secure damaged structures, while others distributed energy supplies and food. The Larathi watched in amazement. Their species had endured for years on their own ingenuity, but these humans brought something new, knowledge combined with physical strength and unwavering determination. Communication was still difficult, but progress was visible. The humans had developed a system of gestures, light signals, and vibrations that allowed them to convey instructions effectively. Slowly, the Larathi began to mimic the humans, learning not only how to respond but also how to anticipate potential dangers. The collaboration was imperfect, but it was effective. While the humans worked, they also observed the survivors closely. They noticed small details, the way the Larathi adapted to the toxic air, the creative ways they filtered water, and the careful organization of scarce resources. It was clear that the aliens had not given up entirely. They had survived through intelligence, patience, and resilience. But they needed guidance, and the humans provided it. Over several days, progress was made. Water purification systems were restored. Shelters were reinforced. Energy sources began functioning again. The Larathi regained strength and started to move with more confidence. Small moments of joy emerged: a shared meal, a repaired tool, a successful energy transfer. These victories were simple but profound, marking a turning point in the survivors' recovery. However, the planet remained unforgiving. During one storm, ash clouds swept across the settlement, reducing visibility to nearly zero. The humans moved quickly, directing the Larathi to safer areas and securing unstable shelters. Some crew members worked in near-blind conditions, relying on memory and training to navigate the treacherous terrain. When the storm finally passed, the damage was extensive but not catastrophic thanks to their quick response. In the quiet after the storm, the humans and Larathi gathered to assess the situation. The aliens were beginning to understand that cooperation was key. Alone, they had survived for years through ingenuity. Together, guided by the humans, they could rebuild and protect each other more effectively. The humans emphasized patience, observation, and teamwork, and the Larathi absorbed these lessons with surprising speed. The humans also began to notice a change in the Larathi's behavior. Where fear had once dominated, there was now curiosity and initiative. The survivors started to take on small tasks independently, repairing minor damage, organizing food, even experimenting with ways to capture and store energy more efficiently. The humans encouraged this independence, knowing that true survival would require the Larathi to rely on their own skills as much as on human assistance. One day, while inspecting a remote shelter, the crew discovered a childlike Larathi who had survived alone for weeks. The humans carefully approached, understanding that trust had to be earned slowly. They offered food, water, and warmth, and the young survivor eventually followed them back to the main cluster. The Larathi adults watched in awe, realizing that the humans' patience and compassion extended even to the most vulnerable members of their species. As days turned into weeks, the humans continued their work. They repaired critical infrastructure, connected distant shelters, and trained the Larathi in basic maintenance of their systems. Each success strengthened the bond between species. The Larathi began to see the humans not as outsiders but as partners, allies who would stand with them even in the harshest conditions. Despite these achievements, challenges remained. The planet was unpredictable. Sudden tremors could destabilize shelters. Toxic clouds could drift in unexpectedly, and the survivors' weakened bodies required constant attention. The humans adapted, setting up early warning systems and teaching the Larathi to monitor environmental hazards. Their approach combined technology, observation, and an understanding of natural patterns, a combination that slowly transformed the survivors' approach to their world. In the evenings, when storms subsided, the humans would gather in small groups with the Larathi. They shared stories of Earth, of survival, and of hope. Even with the language barrier, the exchange of ideas created a shared understanding. The humans began to see the planet not as an enemy, but as a challenge to overcome together. The Larathi, once fearful and isolated, began to see the humans as mentors and friends. One particularly quiet night, as the red sun dipped behind jagged mountains, the humans reflected on how far they had come. They had landed on a desolate world, faced unimaginable dangers, and yet step by step they had brought life back to a species on the brink of extinction. The work was far from over, but the progress was undeniable. The Deathworlders understood something essential. Survival was not just about endurance. It was about guidance, trust, and shared effort. The Larathi were not helpless. They were intelligent, resourceful, and adaptable, but they had been weakened by circumstance. The humans' role was to restore hope, to provide tools and knowledge that could help the aliens reclaim their world. As Part 4 drew to a close, the humans prepared for the next stage of their mission, connecting more clusters, repairing larger systems, and facing even greater dangers. The bond between human and Larathi had grown strong, but the planet remained unpredictable. Each day would test their courage, skill, and patience. And yet the humans were ready. For the first time in decades, the Larathi began to imagine a future where survival was not a constant struggle, where their species could thrive again. The humans had shown them that hope was not lost, that life could endure even in the harshest conditions. And in that moment, standing on a ridge above the restored cluster, the humans realized the magnitude of what they were doing. They were not just saving a species. They were helping to rebuild an entire civilization. Each act of repair, each lesson taught, each shared moment of trust was a building block for the future. The planet still held dangers. Storms would come, fissures would open, and resources would remain scarce. But the humans and the Larathi had learned something powerful together. When knowledge, courage, and empathy come together, survival is possible. And with that understanding, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The work was far from over, but the Deathworlders had proven their worth. They had stepped into the unknown, faced a world designed to challenge every limit, and emerged as protectors, guides, and allies. The Larathi, once isolated and broken, were beginning to reclaim their strength, inspired by the humans' unwavering determination. In the quiet moments as the sun set and the ash settled, the humans and Larathi looked at each other and understood something unspoken. They were no longer two separate species. They were partners in survival, united by purpose, courage, and hope. And in that desolate, ash-covered world, the seeds of recovery had taken root. The humans had worked with the Larathi for months now, and the survivors were slowly beginning to trust them completely. Shelters had been repaired, water systems were stable, and energy grids were functioning again. What had once been isolated clusters of frightened, fragile beings were now becoming small communities capable of sustaining themselves. But the planet had other plans. No one could ignore the signs. Tremors had become more frequent, deeper, and longer lasting. The red sun, already dim and harsh, shifted unpredictably in the sky, bringing sudden heat waves or freezing nights. And new storms, more violent than any the humans had experienced before, swept across the land without warning, destroying repaired structures and sending survivors scrambling for cover. The crew understood that their work was far from over. This was not a world that offered second chances. Every repair, every act of care had to be carefully planned. The humans had grown into their roles as protectors, always alert, always calculating the risks of each action. They had learned to predict the planet's moods, reading the signs in the wind, the soil, and the clouds. But even with experience, there was no certainty. One morning, a warning signal reached the main camp. A distant cluster of Larathi had triggered their energy beacon, indicating a crisis. The humans acted immediately, preparing supplies and reviewing maps of the region. It was a treacherous journey. The terrain was unstable, with deep fissures, shifting ash plains, and pockets of toxic gases. The crew would need to move quickly but cautiously, balancing speed with safety. As they set out, the humans noticed small signs of movement in the distance. The Larathi survivors had begun to explore the surrounding land, venturing cautiously beyond their shelters. For them, this was both exciting and frightening. The humans encouraged these explorations, teaching them to recognize safe paths, detect unstable ground, and respond to sudden environmental hazards. Slowly, the aliens began to move more confidently, guided by the humans' knowledge and experience. When they finally reached the isolated cluster, the situation was dire. Shelters had been damaged, water sources contaminated, and many survivors were weak from exposure and hunger. Some had believed no one would come, that they were truly abandoned. The humans understood the weight of this realization and approached with care. They moved slowly, ensuring the aliens felt safe. Immediately, teams were divided to address the most urgent problems. Some humans worked on structural repairs, reinforcing damaged shelters and stabilizing precarious roofs. Others focused on water purification, setting up temporary filtration systems to provide immediate relief. The medical team attended to the sick and injured, using portable equipment and limited supplies to treat dehydration, infections, and injuries sustained during the storms. The Larathi watched closely, learning from every action. They began to understand how to combine their own survival knowledge with the humans' methods. For instance, the aliens had long known which plants could filter toxins from water, and the humans taught them how to integrate this knowledge with mechanical systems to increase efficiency. Slowly, a sense of partnership developed. Despite the progress, challenges emerged constantly. One day, a sudden tremor shook the ground as the humans were repairing a collapsed water conduit. Dust and debris filled the air, making visibility almost zero. One crew member slipped near the edge of a fissure, but another reached out just in time, pulling them back to safety. The Larathi watched, astonished by the humans' reflexes and calmness under pressure. That incident highlighted something crucial. The humans' presence was more than just helpful. They inspired confidence. The Larathi had survived alone for so long that they had grown cautious, hesitant to take risks. The humans showed them that calculated action, skill, and cooperation could turn danger into opportunity. Slowly, the survivors began to take initiative. performing repairs, distributing resources, and even exploring areas the humans had not yet mapped. Communication remained a challenge, but progress continued. The humans had developed a system combining gestures, light pulses, and vibration signals that allowed instructions to be understood clearly. Over time, the Lorathi began using the system themselves, not just to follow orders, but to communicate their own observations, requests, and warnings. This exchange marked a turning point. The survivors were no longer passive recipients of help. They were active participants in rebuilding their world. As days turned into weeks, the humans focused on connecting multiple clusters. The distant groups had survived in isolation for years, unaware that others had endured. The humans' goal was to create a network of communication and resource sharing, allowing the Lorathi to rebuild as a unified community, rather than scattered pockets of survivors. Traveling between clusters was increasingly risky. One day, while moving supplies across an ash plain, a sudden storm erupted. Visibility dropped to near zero, and strong winds threatened to sweep the humans off their feet. They huddled together, using body contact and hand signals to guide each other. The storm lasted for hours, testing their endurance and patience. When it finally subsided, they continued their journey, exhausted but undeterred. Upon reaching the next cluster, the humans encountered a new challenge: mistrust. These survivors had been isolated for so long that they had grown suspicious of outsiders, fearing that help might bring more harm than good. The humans had to earn their trust slowly. They offered small gestures first, distributing food and water, repairing a shelter, assisting with minor injuries. Gradually, the survivors began to accept their presence, opening up and learning from the humans' guidance. During this period, the humans also observed a remarkable change in the Lorathi. Their intelligence and adaptability had always been evident, but now their creativity shone through. They began to innovate solutions to challenges the humans had not anticipated. For example, when a water pump failed in a remote shelter, the aliens devised a gravity-fed system using natural slopes and salvaged materials, demonstrating ingenuity that impressed even the most experienced crew members. The humans encouraged this independence, knowing that true survival depended on the Lorathi taking control of their own world. At the same time, the crew remained vigilant, prepared to intervene if necessary. They understood that the planet's harsh conditions left no room for error, and every decision could have consequences for both species. One evening, after a long day of repairs and coordination, the humans gathered with the Lorathi around a central shelter. The survivors shared stories of their past, of lost cities and families, of small triumphs and devastating losses. The humans listened carefully, learning more about the culture, history, and resilience of the aliens. These moments were small but vital. They reinforced trust, strengthened relationships, and reminded both species why they were working together. But the planet's dangers were never far away. Another storm approached, larger and more violent than previous ones. The humans quickly organized evacuation routes, reinforcing shelters and moving the most vulnerable survivors to safe locations. The winds tore at structures, clouds of ash and debris filled the air, and the ground shook with tremors. Yet, through careful planning and teamwork, the humans minimized casualties and damage. After the storm passed, the humans assessed the situation. Damage had been significant but not catastrophic. The Lorathi were exhausted but alive, and the humans felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Every storm, every tremor, every challenge had been met not just with survival but with progress. The survivors were growing stronger, more confident, and more capable. As Part 5 drew to a close, the humans reflected on the lessons they had learned. They had faced relentless environmental hazards, navigated mistrust and fear, and guided a species on the brink of extinction toward recovery. The planet had tested their limits, but it had also revealed their strengths. Their presence had transformed despair into hope, isolation into community, and weakness into resilience. The Deathworlders understood something fundamental. Survival was not simply about enduring danger. It was about building trust, teaching skills, inspiring confidence, and working together. And through their efforts, the Lorathi were beginning to reclaim not just life, but agency, the ability to shape their own future once more. The humans prepared for the next stage of their mission, connecting even more distant clusters, addressing larger structural challenges, and continuing to face the unpredictable forces of a world that demanded vigilance. They knew the path ahead would be difficult, but they were ready. The bond between species had deepened, and together they could face whatever lay ahead. In that ash-covered world, the humans had become more than visitors. They were protectors, guides, and partners. And the Larathi, once broken and afraid, were beginning to see a future where survival was not. The humans had come a long way. After months of navigating treacherous terrain, repairing shelters, purifying water, and guiding the Larathi, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The once isolated and fragile survivors had grown stronger, more confident and capable of taking care of themselves. The humans knew that their work was not just about immediate survival anymore. It was about building a future. The mission had grown in scale. Clusters of Larathi that were once scattered and disconnected were now forming a network of small communities, linked by communication hubs, energy systems, and safe pathways. For the first time in decades, the planet had a sense of order amidst the chaos. But the humans also knew that the challenges were far from over. The planet remained unpredictable, and there were still dangers that could undo months of progress in moments. One morning, as the red sun rose over the jagged horizon, the crew received a signal from a particularly remote group of survivors. This cluster had been cut off for decades, surviving in near total isolation. Their shelters were fragile, their water contaminated, and their food scarce. The humans prepared for what would be their most difficult mission yet. Every step, every decision had to be precise. The journey to the remote cluster was exhausting. The humans navigated shifting ash plains, crossed deep fissures, and avoided pockets of toxic gases. Each crew member relied on their training and instincts, moving efficiently while keeping an eye on the Larathi who followed their lead. The aliens had learned much from the humans, but this part of the world was new to them, and guidance was essential. When they finally reached the cluster, the scene was grim. Many of the survivors were weak and sick, their shelters barely standing against the harsh winds. The humans immediately assessed priorities. Water sources needed cleaning, energy systems required repair, and medical attention was urgent. They worked tirelessly, dividing into teams to tackle each problem simultaneously. The Larathi watched in awe. The humans moved with a combination of strength, skill, and care that they had never experienced. Every action was deliberate, every decision informed by training and experience. Slowly, the aliens began to assist in ways they had not before. They followed instructions, adapted techniques, and even suggested improvements based on their own knowledge of the land. It was a collaboration that had taken months to develop, and it was finally bearing fruit. Over several days, the humans repaired shelters, set up water purification systems, and stabilized energy grids. The survivors began to regain strength, their movements more confident and purposeful. Small victories, like a repaired roof, a functioning water pump, or a safe passage through dangerous terrain, were celebrated quietly but meaningfully. Each success strengthened the bond between species and reminded everyone why this mission was worth every challenge. Communication continued to improve. The humans had developed a system using gestures, light signals, and vibrations, which the Larathi now used themselves. Instructions, warnings, and even simple expressions of gratitude were exchanged with ease. This was more than survival. It was connection, understanding, and trust. Despite progress, the planet remained dangerous. One afternoon, a sudden tremor shook the cluster. Dust and ash filled the air, and debris threatened the fragile shelters. The humans acted instantly, guiding the Larathi to safer locations, securing structures, and stabilizing energy systems. The aliens followed without hesitation, showing a level of confidence and skill that had been unimaginable when the humans first arrived. The incident highlighted an important truth. The Larathi were learning to survive not just because of the humans, but alongside them. The Deathworlders had taught them tools, techniques, and strategies, but the aliens' intelligence, adaptability, and creativity were equally essential. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. As the weeks passed, the humans focused on expanding the network of connected clusters. Remote survivors, once isolated and fearful, were now able to communicate with other groups, share resources, and coordinate rebuilding efforts. This sense of community was new to the Larathi, and it brought a kind of hope they had not felt in generations. One evening, as the red sun dipped below the horizon, the humans and Larathi gathered to observe the improvements. Shelters were repaired, energy grids hummed steadily, and water systems flowed cleanly. The survivors moved with confidence, assisting one another and sharing tasks. The humans stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. For the first time, they could see that the mission's ultimate goal, creating sustainable survival, was within reach. The humans also reflected on what they had learned. This world, harsh and unforgiving, had tested their limits. It had demanded patience, courage, and ingenuity. But it had also revealed the power of collaboration, trust, and empathy. By working with the Larathi, the humans had not only saved lives, they had helped a species reclaim its dignity, agency, and future. Challenges were not entirely behind them. The planet remained volatile, and unforeseen dangers could arise at any moment. But the humans now trusted the Larathi to respond effectively, and the Larathi trusted the humans to guide them when necessary. This mutual reliance created a balance that had been missing for decades. One particularly significant day, a large ash storm approached from the east. The humans quickly organized an evacuation plan, guiding the Larathi to reinforced shelters and ensuring that critical resources were secure. The storm raged for hours, winds tearing at structures, dust choking the air, and tremors shaking the ground. Yet when it finally subsided, the damage was minimal. The survivors had learned to act efficiently, and the humans' planning had ensured safety. After the storm, a quiet celebration emerged. The humans and Larathi shared food, stories, and small rituals of gratitude. There was laughter, a rare and beautiful sound in a world that had been filled with fear and despair for so long. The humans realized that they had not only saved lives, they had restored a sense of normalcy, a feeling of community, and the possibility of joy. In the days that followed, the humans began preparing for the next step, long-term sustainability. They trained the Larathi to maintain energy systems, manage water supplies, and rebuild shelters independently. They encouraged problem-solving, innovation, and planning for future generations. The goal was clear. Eventually, the humans would leave, and the Larathi would be able to survive and thrive on their own. The Larathi responded eagerly. They had learned much from the humans, but they also began to teach in return. They shared knowledge of the planet's natural resources, survival strategies, and ancient technology. The humans listened carefully, adapting these lessons to enhance their efforts. This exchange deepened the bond between species and reinforced the idea that survival depended on mutual understanding and respect. Over time, the isolated clusters were fully connected. Water systems functioned across distances, energy grids powered shelters, and communication hubs allowed for coordination and planning. The planet was still harsh, but the Larathi had regained a measure of control. They were no longer simply surviving. They were rebuilding, reclaiming their world one step at a time. The humans reflected on the journey. From the moment they had answered the initial signal, they had faced extreme challenges, unpredictable dangers, and the unknown. Yet through patience, skill, and compassion, they had transformed despair into hope. They had taught a species to survive, rebuild, and dream again. Finally, the time came for the humans to prepare for departure. The Artemis IV had brought them across the stars, into a world that had tested every limit, and now it was time to leave the Larathi in capable hands. The decision was bittersweet. The crew had grown attached to the survivors, formed bonds of trust and respect, and shared in their triumphs. But they also knew that their mission was complete. The Larathi were ready to continue without them. Before leaving, the humans gathered with the Larathi. There were gestures of gratitude, light signals, and subtle expressions of emotion that conveyed more than words could. The humans reassured the survivors that they had the skills, knowledge, and courage to continue rebuilding. And in return, the Larathi offered a promise to care for one another, to honor what had been taught, and to continue the journey of recovery. As the Artemis IV lifted from the planet, the humans looked back at the world they had helped transform. The once desolate and fractured landscape now held signs of life, hope, and resilience. The Larathi had survived, adapted, and begun to reclaim their civilization. The humans had not only answered a call for help, they had changed the course of a species' history. For the first time, the crew allowed themselves a moment of reflection. They had faced the unknown, endured extreme conditions, and witnessed a species rise from the brink of extinction. They had learned that survival was not just about strength or skill, it was about patience, empathy, and collaboration. And they had seen that hope, once restored, could transform even the harshest world. The Artemis IV carried them away from the red sun and ash-choked plains, but the lessons and experiences remained. The humans had faced a challenge that few could imagine, and had emerged victorious, not alone but with the Larathi as partners. And somewhere on that distant world, the survivors looked to the horizon, ready to build a future they had once thought impossible, guided by the